Good morning, everybody. My name is Thomas Cameron. I'm the Chief Architect at Red Hat for Canada and the Central Region of the United States. So the airlines love me. I manage Canada out of Austin, Texas. I don't know how that happened, but so I get to fly a lot, and I've got frequent flyer miles coming out of my ears. Yes, if the Canadian guy got Mexico. No, I've actually been down into Mexico before for Red Hat as well. So today we're going to be talking about Red Hat Network Satellite Server, tips and tricks, power user tips and tricks. We're going to be talking about systems deployment. As I said, my name's Thomas Cameron. You can see from the alphabet soup after my name that I've actually been doing this for a while. I'm Red Hat Certified Architect and Red Hat Certified Security Specialist and Red Hat Certified Virtualization Administrator. I actually hold every technical certification on the platform side that Red Hat has to offer. So in layman's terms, I don't get out much. My contact information, I am pretty easy to reach. I'm thomas@redhat.com. Yes, I've been here for a while. I'm choir boy in Poundrel on Freenode, Thomas D. Cameron on Twitter. Would love it if you followed me. And then my people page is people.redhat.com/tcameron. My blog, which has been sorely, poorly maintained, is excogitatus. What we're going to be talking about today is Red Hat Network Satellite and Fedora Spacewalk. I'm going to talk about a couple of my assumptions. I'm going to ask you to be patient, and I'll explain why in just a little while. I'm going to talk about installation tips, organizations, config file management, including macros. I'll be talking about system groups, channel cloning, creating locked channels, deploying internally developed or third-party applications, using activation keys, tying all of this together with Kickstart profiles, and then a couple of cobbler tips and tricks and how to configure DHCP, PXE, and TFTP for Kickstart. I want to note, the deck that you are seeing today is significantly shortened. The raw deck that I did is available at people.redhat.com/tcameron. It's about 415 pages. I'm going to ask you guys at the end of the presentation today how many slides you think it is today. So, about Red Hat Network Satellite Server. RHN Satellite is the best systems management platform for Red Hat products. We've been doing this for 10 years now. It's a really good software suite. I'm not going to say it doesn't have warts, because it's human-written code, and it does, but it's a very, very powerful systems management platform. It includes a rich web-based UI. It is so easy, even a Windows admin can use it. As Fedora is the upstream community project for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the Spacewalk project is the upstream community project for Red Hat Network Satellite Server. And you can take a look at where Satellite is going by going to spacewalk.redhat.com. I am assuming that you are at least somewhat familiar with RHN or RHN Satellite. Today's session is not an introduction. We will be moving quickly. When I talk about the navigation bar, I'm talking about the nav bar at the top of the screen. When I'm talking about the left nav bar, I mean that gray box over on the left-hand side of the screen. And when I talk about sub-tabs, I'm talking about the tabs in the middle of the page. They are typically referring to whatever the object that you've selected in the web UI is. I will ask you to be patient. I'm going to jump around quite a bit. I'm going to take a lot of different looks at different technologies that are available, or different methodologies that are available through the satellite server. And when we get done today, the goal is you will be able to deploy a system in minutes, even if it has custom configurations and third-party applications installed. A couple of installation tips and tricks. Put in a request for your satellite certificate with global support services. It can take a little while, and you don't want to be sitting around looking like an idiot at the installer screen. You guys know the Zune tattoo guy, right? Yeah, how'd that work out for him? DNS needs to be working in both forward and reverse in your environment. I recommend that you kickstart the machine that is going to be your satellite server. The installation guide says you only need at base, but you also need to then go and configure SendMail. So I kickstart my machine with SendMail. You don't need postfix, doesn't hurt to have it, but you don't need it. You can remove it. For this presentation, or for the part of the presentation that's in raw format at people.redhat.com, I used a graphical tool to set up the firewall. So I needed those packages on my system. So I added those to my Kickstart. I also, you need to have Pixie Linux.0, so you want to install the syslinux RPM, and I use NFS in my lab to do my channel imports. The main thing is, you don't want to install any web components in your Kickstart. The satellite installation will do that for you. I'm lazy, so I tied it all together in a Kickstart file. And there you go. I've got base, SendMail, the firewall configuration tools, Xorg, X11, Xauth, fonts, and my NFS client stuff in syslinux. Once you've Kickstarted the machine, register it to RHN. Before you install any packages, sorry, I got out of order. Before you install any packages, you want to import the GPG key. So rpm-import the Red Hat release key. I recommend you register the system to RHN before you start the installation process. You just use RHN regks username and password. Then what I recommend you do is install the satellite certificate on the machine in RHN. So you go to the RHN website, go to the machine in question. When you click on it, click on the satellite tab and either upload or copy and paste your satellite certificate. When you're done, you update the certificate and it will show up and say it is an RHN satellite server. You also want to keep a copy of that certificate on the local file system before you begin the installation. So I've got it on the system that I'm going to be installing the satellite server on. You can verify that you're subscribed to all of the correct channels by running yum repo list. When you're installing, either shut down, please don't, just fix it, shut down the firewall or make sure that it's set up correctly. In the raw version of this slide deck, there's an entire section on the exact settings that you need to use and the tools that you can use to do it. And in the documentation, it's got all the port numbers and whether they need to be inbound or outbound. So use the documentation for installation, make sure that the firewall is set up correctly. Ditto for send mail. The raw version of this deck has all of the steps, including screenshots, but it's also in the documentation. So in the install guide, it talks about how you need to set up send mail. Make sure that it's set up correctly, or you will not receive alerts from the satellite server for errata and things like that. When you're installing the satellite server, I recommend that you use the answers.txt file that is included in the install directory on the installation media. It just minimizes your chances of fat fingering something during installation and having to start over again. So I recommend you use the answers.txt file. If you do not have good network connectivity, run the installer in disconnected mode. Install.pl -- disconnected. It's very easy to reconnect to satellite once the server's up and running. But if you have a network failure while you're doing the installation will bomb and you have to start all over again. It really sucks. Don't do that. You can also pass command line arguments to the install.pl file. I have found that the only one I need to pass is the one to enable the TFTP server. The answer file covers every other question that the installer asks you. And so you run install.pl, enable TFTP equals yes, give it the answer file. It runs through, installs all the RPMs, and when you're done, it says go to this URL and finish configuration. It's very, very easy. When you go to the URL, it's a standard self-signed certificate, so you'll jump through the hoops of clicking accept and confirm security. You will fill out the user information for the satellite administrator. Username, password, friendly name, create the login, and it'll say you need to go finish configuration by clicking here. When you go and you click there, you're going to fill out any additional information, like if you have an HTTP proxy, you can put that information there, the proxy, the URL, the username and password. You can turn on monitoring if you want to use RHN monitoring, and when you get done and click on update, it's going to say you need to restart the satellite server. I'm going to tell you to stop. When you get that message and it says you can restart the satellite server, run yum update to get your system up to date, and be aware that SE Linux contexts don't get set correctly by the installer. It's just an installer bug. So run restorecon against those directories and then restart the satellite server. If you don't do that, you'll get all kinds of weird errors and be pulling your hair out. So you can click the restart button or just from the command line do rhn-satellite restart. After updating, you will probably get an email saying the database schema needs to be updated. You'll get an email that looks like this. Shut down the satellite, do a backup of your database, update the schema, and you should be good. A common gotcha. When you install the satellite server, it creates a data table space with 4 gigs of space. If you import rel 5 and rel 6, you're going to be using about 7 gigs of table space. It will bomb, and you'll come in the next morning after running your satellite sync, and you'll be cussing at me and cussing at Red Hat. So just update the table space. SU to Oracle and run a command, db control extend data TBS. Every time you run it, it increases it by 500 megs. So I just put it in a for loop, and I do it 8 times. When I get done, I go from having about 4 gigs to having about 8 gigs of space. After installation, run cobbler check and just follow the instructions there. I will say, it says run cobbler get loaders. I recommend against doing that because it goes and it fetches files off of a Fedora people page. It works great, but your security folks might have an issue with that because they're unsigned, they're not from Red Hat, they're just community stuff. I recommend instead that you copy the pixielinux.0 file from user share syslinux to varlib tftp boot. So that's what that looks like. I just copied it across. And then when you're done, run cobbler sync, and it'll set everything up for you for the Kickstart environment. So let's jump to creating organizations. Satellite server's up, it's running, it's configured. What you can do is define organizations based on divisions, based on outsourced partners, based on, the scenarios are pretty much endless. I recommend that you do install, or you set up a separate organization from the stock one, even if you're absolutely positively 100% certain that you're never gonna have to carve your satellite server up into organizations, because you're wrong. It happens. And it sucks to retrofit organizations once you've already allocated subscriptions. So you're going to go to Admin, go to Organizations, click Create a New Organization, give it its name, give it the login for the organization administrator, fill out contact information, and click on Create Organization. Once that organization is created, you need to allocate your entitlements and software subscriptions. You're going to need to allocate management, monitoring, provisioning, and either virtualization or virtualization platform. Virtualization is for any machine that's running virtual machines. Virtualization platform is for those systems which have unlimited virtualization. And it looks like this. You're going to get this screen when you click on Continue. You're just going to fill in the number of entitlements you want to grant to each one of those and click Update Organization. Once you've done that, you need to now go allocate the software subscriptions. Don't forget, base OS child channels and FlexGuest entitlements. There are potentially hundreds or even thousands of channels. And here's what that looks like. You click on software channel entitlements, you scroll down, okay, I found cluster storage, so I granted cluster storage. And you scroll down and you find rel clustering. You scroll down and you find productivity apps. And you scroll 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 and you scroll, and it kind of sucks. Read the raw version of this. It has some tips on how to do searches to make this a lot easier. But anyway, you get done. You've gotten through 500 possible channels. You click on Submit, log out, log back in as your organization admin, and you will see there's all my Rel 5 channels. There's all my Rel 6 channels. I'm good to go there. There are all the entitlements that I have. So I have now set up my system to have an organization with exactly the subscriptions that I need for that organization. So let that sit for a little while. Let's be patient. Let's talk about setting up configuration files. Having customized configuration files are just used for keeping things consistent. Consistent means easier to use. You don't have that cowboy environment where somebody goes in and goes, oh, I know better than that darn Linux engineering team. I'm going to change this stuff up. You can set your config files to be consistent, centrally managed, and cheaper to manage. And the way that we do this is we go into the Configuration tab, choose Configuration Channels, and choose Create a New Config Channel. It's fairly straightforward. You give it a name, you give it a label for the database, and then a description. When you do that, you can then go in and add files. So you click on Add Files, choose Create a File, and you can define whether it's a text file, a directory, or whatever. Give it the path to the file. You can set ownership of the file. You can set permissions on the file. You can even set SE Linux context. And as far as I'm concerned, the magic is that in this section, you can use macros. Click on that link right there, the RHN reference guide, to learn the format of the macros. But you can have text that's going to be consistent across all your systems, and then you can have content that it gets dynamically generated on a per host basis. IP address, host name, MAC address, all kinds of stuff. It's very, very flexible. When you get done, you click on Create the Configuration File, and you'll see that now in my Acme config channel, I have one file. If I click on that, I'll see that's the name of the file. I've got versioning. I can compare versions, and that's what my configuration channels looks like once I'm done. Okay? So let's move on from configuration files, which are very, very powerful, into system groups. You can define system groups really based on anything. You can define them based on the geographical location, on the role of the server, the production status. Is it QA or is it dev or is it prod? What is it? And the cool thing is you can work in this interface with unions and intersections. A union is show me everything that's in Group A and Group B. An intersection is show me everything that's in Group A that is also in Group B. It's a great way to be able to drill down and say, show me all the systems that meet these 3 criteria. Oh, crap, I got to apply updates or something like that. So very powerful. So you go into Systems, System Groups, and choose Create New Group. Now, I generally create Sorry about that. I generally create, basically groups based on roles, or groups based on geo, or groups based on production status. You will create groups based on your business environment. But I create a group for web servers, and there it is. I create a new group over there, and then say, well, let's go ahead and do database servers, create a new group, lather, rinse, and repeat for the groups that you want to create. In this example, like I said, I did role, I did production status, and I did location. So I've got my Austin servers, my Raleigh servers, my Westford servers, database, mail, and web servers, and then also dev, QA, and production servers. Setting the groups up, fairly straightforward, but it really makes management a lot easier. So let's talk now about channel cloning. Channel cloning is a very, very powerful capability. It allows you to take the content that you get from RHN that synchronizes to your satellite server, copy it over into a channel for your environment, and lock it at a point in time. It's a great foundation for the dev, QA, production life cycle. You clone content, you create a dev channel, clone the content from RHN, the stuff that Red Hat gives you, subscribe your development systems to the dev channel, test in that context, make sure that your development environment is working the way that you expect, and then you clone the QA channels, or you clone the dev channels into QA, clone the content, subscribe the systems, test in that context. This is a great place to get community buy-in, and by community, I mean your internal or external customers. You run it through the paces, you ask your developers to run it through the paces. That way, if anything goes wrong later on, you're like, hey, you signed off on it. So this is what I also call the CYA phase of software deployment. And then finally, you create your production channels, clone the content from QA to prod, subscribe your prod systems to it, and go to town. You can do this through the web UI. The web UI is great for cloning either the original version, like RHEL 4.0 or 5.0 or 6.0, or for cloning the state of the channel as it is today, like all of the errata that have been applied to RHEL 6, for instance, through today. It's not very good at doing a locked channel. Like if you have an ISV requirement that says we will run 6.1 exactly, it's not very good at that. You can do it, but it's kind of a pain. We'll get to how to do that in just a little while. So the way that we do that is we go into, or the way that we create clone channels, we go to channels, go to manage software channels. Once we do that, we click on clone channel. It's fairly straightforward. You say I'm going to clone it from this channel, what I want to clone, the current state of the channel as it is today, the original state, like the .0 release, or I want to select errata. Select errata is painful. Don't do it. Give it the channel name. I just added dev to it. Channel name, channel label, I added dev to that, and the channel summary. I added dev to that. Choose create channel. It'll take a while to do this because it's making duplicate entries in the database. It's not cloning the actual packages. We only store one version of the package on the file system. But eventually it'll come back and there's your dev channel. You can scroll down and add additional information, a description, maintainer information, support policy, whether it's a public channel that anyone can subscribe to, whether it's locked to only your organization or all organizations, and then you click on update channel and it's created the channel. And then once you do that, you see there's my dev channel. It's got the same number of RPMs as the production one, or the RHN one does. Next, I need to clone the child channels, right? Because there's RHEL, and then there's the add-ons to RHEL. So I go in and I choose clone channel again. This time I'm going to say get the content from, for instance, the scalable file system. Current state, create channel, change the label to dev, fill out the same information we talked about before, contact information and so on, update the channel, and then sure enough, now we've got the dev channel for scalable file system. Lather, rinse, and repeat for each of the child channels you want cloned, and eventually you'll come up with a page that looks like this. There's my dev version of all of my channels. You can look at the errata sub-tab on the channel and use list or remove to see all the errata that have been added to the child channel. You can order them by date, by name, by type of errata. You could even do something like figure out what the date is and then back everything out to get a locked channel, but it's a painful manual process. Michelle Newman, one of our awesome consultants in our professional services group, helped generate this page. We've got a page on access.redhat.com that shows the exact release dates of all of the releases of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So this is very handy for creating those locked channels. And this is what that looks like. You go look at errata, go look at list or move, you can order by date, and then you could check them off and back them out, but it's painful. Don't do that. We'll get to that. Next, you're going to clone the dev channel to QA. Do not clone your QA or production stuff from RHN. Clone it from the dev channel. That allows you to enforce discipline that says it has to go to dev, then to QA, then to prod. Nothing can ever make it into prod unless it's been through dev and QA. It enforces a discipline on your environment. So, same steps. First we got our dev channels, next we got our QA channels, and then finally we got our prod channels. This is kind of time consuming, but the beauty of it is you only have to do it once. It's very straightforward. So that's how we create cloned channels specific to your environment. So be patient. We're going to jump around a little bit. If there's anyone from Red Hat HR in here, I'm going to get so burned on this slide. But now, what if I do need to clone to a specific date? You can do it through the UI. It's painful because you have to go and manually figure out which ones you want and which ones you're going to back out. It's painful. Don't do that. So what you can do is use the Spacewalk clone by date script that's part of the Spacewalk utils RPM. It's written by a guy named Justin Sherrill on the systems management engineering team. Dude is incredibly sharp. I've been really lucky to work with him for several years. What I do is I put it in an until loop because sometimes if the satellite server gets busy or whatever, it'll time out. So I just put it in an until loop until this completes, sleep 1, done. And the way that looks is I created a little shell script that says, until we run the command, spacewalk clone by date with the user, the password, -y says just answer yes to any questions. From this server, and notice it's the server/RPC/API, through this date, link the RHEL server channel to the Acme RHEL server channel, the RHN tools to Acme RHN tools, the RHEL 6 cluster to Acme cluster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I get done with that, it's going to run through until it completes. When I get done, it's going to look like this, and bada boom, bada bing. I have my locked channels at exactly RHEL 5.4, for instance. You can do it, whatever date you want. You can log them to a point in time. I do the same thing with RHEL 6. It's the same script. It's just that I'm linking RHEL 6 content now. And when I get done, it runs through the script, and I've got my RHEL 5 content there that's locked at 5.4. I got my RHEL 6 content there that's locked at 6.2. Very, very handy utility. I'm really thrilled that he did that. So we've gotten locked channels. Just hold on to that knowledge for a second. It took me forever to find all these images. I don't mind telling you. I Googled the hell out of this. So we're going to talk about internally developed or third-party apps. If you want to learn how to create packages from internally developed or third-party apps, come back to this room after lunch. I'm going to be doing a session on that. But there are two components to creating custom content channels. There's the web UI component and the command line component of it. For the web UI, choose the parent channel. You do need to make your custom content a child channel to a parent channel. I generally make it a child to the RHN provided software, and then I'm able to do it the dev, QA, and prod cycle. So I'll do that. In this example, I'm gonna talk about third-party software. It's a Hello World RPM, but it gives you the idea of how this works. So I'm gonna go into channels, go to manage software channels, and instead of clone, I'm gonna say create a new channel. I create that new channel, give it a name, a label, and say what is the parent channel going to be. In this case, I just made it the parent RHEL 6 x86-64. Oh, make sure you get the architecture right. If you don't put the architecture correctly, it'll bomb out. Same information that we've seen before. Fill in all the contact information, whether it's public or private, choose create channel. And there we go. We've got the Hello World, or the Hello World channel, and I can see that it is now a child channel off of RHEL 6, but there are no packages in there. Now I'm going to go to the command line. You have to GPG sign your packages. Yum will not allow you to install unsigned packages. To learn how to do that, come to the second session. So you sign your package, RPM-resign, check that signature to make sure it's okay, and sure enough, yep, it's okay. Use the RHN push command, and it looks like this. RHN push the package to the server/app, username and password, and the channel that it's going into. It's very easy. RHN push, blah, 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 blah. And now when I look in the web UI, boom, now I've got the 1 RPM in my custom channel. It's fairly straightforward. It's easy to use. If I click on that link, there's my Hello World RPM, and it'll tell you the information about it. You also need to import that same GPG key that was used to sign into the satellite server. And the way that you do that is you go to Systems, go to Kickstart, and then choose GPG and SSL keys. Say create a new stored key, browse to that public key, click on Create Key, and it'll show up now in that list. This will be available for any new system which is kickstarted off of this satellite server. That's what the file looks like. You also need to copy it to var www HTML pub on the satellite or anywhere, really, any web accessible location, so that your existing servers can import it by running rpm-import and then the URL from the command line. And that's what that looks like. You copy it over. There's the file. It's now available from the web server. And now we will move on to activation keys. So without activation keys, what you have to do is you have to register your system to the satellite server. It's a manual process. You do it from the command line using RHN register or RHN reg KS. If you do it from the command line, it's not automated. Remember, automation is going to save you money. That and the fact that, I don't know about you guys, I'm lazy. I don't want to log into 400 systems and run RHN reg from the command line. It's inefficient, it's error prone. I want to automate it. The downside, though, is, okay, I'm going to scriptify it. Wait, you're going to put a username and password in plain text in a shell script? Raise your hand if you think that's a good idea. Okay, everybody? This is the dude you don't know. I'm kidding. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? We don't want to put username and password in a shell script. So, and the other bad thing about it is it only registers to the base channel. It doesn't get any of the child channels. It doesn't subscribe you to any of the configuration channels. It doesn't join any system groups. Doesn't do any automatic software deployment or anything like that. You just have an instance on the RHN satellite server, and then you got to go in and clickety and subscribe it to the right child channels. It's a pain. Automation will make your life easier. So from a purely selfish perspective, this is great. And also, it will increase consistency and decrease the amount of time it takes to manage these systems. With activation keys, all those problems go away. I can subscribe it to parent channel, base channels, custom channels. I can deploy software. I can push configuration files. I can do all of those things, including joining the appropriate system groups. So the way that we do that is we click on Systems, go to Activation Keys, and choose Create a New Key. Give it a name, give it a label. You can choose what channel the system's going to subscribe to. So in this case, I just chose the RHN satellite default. So whatever is installed on the machine is the base channel it's going to subscribe to. But if you want to subscribe it to a custom channel, this is where you do it. There's a drop down, and you just click in and go, OK, subscribe to that custom channel that I created. You can also do things like say, I want to make sure that it's got monitoring, provisioning, and either virtualization or virtualization platform capabilities. Create the activation key, and because we clicked on provisioning, I'm going to get an extra choice here. You got to scroll down after the key has been created and make sure you check the box that says do a config file deployment when the system registers. And that way, as soon as the system registers, it pulls down its configs, it's in the right channels, the whole 9 yards. Now, one of the cool things about this is when I create a key, it's smart enough to know that I need to subscribe to the RHN tools channel and also the virtualization tools channel, because I checked the box that said that this machine was going to be doing virtualization. So activation keys are very smart. I then added the Hello World channel. And one thing that's kind of cool is not only does it do RHN tools for the Red Hat provided channels, it's smart enough to even know, even on my custom channels, I need to subscribe to the RHN tools and the virtualization for that locked 5.4 or 6.2 channel. Now, in the key, I can also click on the Packages sub-tab, and I'll see that by default, we're going to install the RHN virtualization host and the RHN config packages for doing configuration file management. It'll automatically deploy those. I recommend that you add in OSAD. OSAD is a little service that listens so that when you try to run a remote command from the satellite console, say go run this on these 100 servers, OSAD listens, and it happens quickly, not instantly because there's network traffic and things like that, but we push the command out and it gets triggered immediately. And then just for giggles, I said I'm going to add the Hello World RPM as well so that I can show you when we deploy a system what that looks like. You can also, in your configuration or in your activation key, choose configuration, subscribe to channels, and say, yeah, by the way, I also want to subscribe to my whatever my configuration file channels are. Under groups, I do something a little odd. You may or may not want to do this in your environment. I always create a master key that I use to register all my systems, and I set up all my provisioning and management and monitoring and all that stuff through there. I don't join any groups with my master key, because all I'm doing is I'm just making that satellite server able to manage that system. So no groups here. We'll come back to that. And so now I've got my master key set up. What I do, and this may make sense in your environment, but you may want to come up with your own methodology, is I then go back and I create keys based on what my business is going to be doing. In my case, I create keys very similarly to how I create system groups. So I go in and I create the Austin key. I don't do any add-on entitlements. All I do is I go to the Groups tab and I say, you're going to be part of the Austin group, and then I create that key. I go in and I create a database key. Again, no add-on entitlements. I just make sure that it's in the right group, the database servers group, and then I go to the Packages tab and I say, oh yeah, since you're a database server, go ahead and install MySQL Server as well when you register. Okay? On the web key, yeah, go ahead and install HTTPD and mod off MySQL. On the mail server key, sendmail and sendmail-cf. So I add them to the right groups, I install software where appropriate based on the role, and when I get done, I've got all of my activation keys. The beauty of activation keys is they are stackable. You can use multiple activation keys when you register a system to the satellite server, and I'll show you an example of that in just a little while. So, whew, finally. We blasted through all of this. Your patience is going to be rewarded. We're going to take all this crazy stuff that we've been bouncing all over the satellite UI and configuring all this kind of weird stuff. We're going to tie them together in Kickstarts. This is how you can take a bare metal machine, pixie boot it, kickstart all the content that we've just defined, register the system based on all the characteristics that we've defined, and have a system in production in minutes. Kickstart is the hands-free automated installation process. And the way that we define these Kickstarts is we go to the web UI, click on Systems, go to Kickstarts, and choose Create a new Kickstart profile. Now, you can do everything in a Kickstart profile through the RHN satellite interface that you can by editing a Kickstart file by hand. It's very, very capable, very, very flexible. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to do Kickstart for all of the web servers in Austin that are in the dev channel. So I'll give it a label, Austin Web Dev, Rel 6. I can choose my base channel, choose the Kickstart tree that I want to kickstart from, and if it's a virtual machine, I can define the virtualization type. Hint, if it's a KVM guest, you don't need to define anything there. I click on Next, and I get the screen that's going to allow me to define where I'm kickstarting from, what the installation media is. Now, by default, it's going to be a URL off of the satellite server. But if you're using the satellite server to kickstart machines at a remote location, and you've got a kickstart tree at that remote location, you'd click this radio button and say, use the installation media at this web server at the remote site. So very, very powerful. Do the root password for the system when it gets kickstarted, and you'll get dumped into the main configuration screen for the kickstart. This is very, very flexible, but that means that it's also got a whole lot of options, and let's talk about some of those options. I can go through and I can say, is this active or not? I can deactivate a kickstart by just unchecking that box, and then it's not even available when a system pixie boots. Do I want to log scripts, post-install scripts, pre-install scripts? I always want to know what's happened when I've installed, so I make sure that I log all of those scripts. Do I want to preserve the ks.cfg? I do. I like to see how it was kickstarted. I leave it on there. It's a great archival mechanism. I can go back later on, log in, and say, oh yeah, this one was kickstarted with this profile. So me, I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. I want all that information on the local machine. I can even do things like set kernel options. So, for instance, on my machines in my office, there's a weird bug that if I don't set no mode set on the kernel command line, they'll lock up during installation. Old flaky video cards. So I can set that on there, and what's really cool about this is when I set this through the web UI, if I go look at the Pixie Linux default configuration file for Pixie booting these machines, it added it to the kernel command line automatically under the hood. So very, very powerful capabilities. I love that. So when I'm defining my Kickstart, I can click on Kickstart Details, go to Operating System. I can make changes here if I want, the Kickstart tree and the parent or the base channel. This screen confused me when I first started playing with Satellite because I've got all these child channels here, and then I've got all these repositories here. And I was like, wait, how am I supposed to do this? The difference between the top part and the bottom part is these are the child channels to which the system will be registered if you don't use activation keys to register. It actually generates a dynamic activation key that you don't know about when it kickstarts the machines. So if you're not going to use an activation key, I don't recommend that, but if you're not going to use an activation key, just check the boxes for the channels that you want it to be subscribed to. The section down at the bottom, though, this is what repositories do you want to be exposed to the system while it is kickstarting. So where do you want to be able to install software from? Okay, so this is during installation, that's after installation is done. Make sense? This confused me because I was like, you know, no, I want it to be subscribed to those. Yeah, it's top part subscriptions, bottom part. Yep. All right, so when I get done defining it, I can go into the Kickstart details advanced options, and all of those things that you can do in the Kickstart file, all those funny, you know, kind of cool tweaks, you can do those in this UI as well. You can do things like what your authentication is, where you're going to install the bootloader, what the firewall status is, what the activation key for RHEL 5 is, what your SE Linux status is, passwords, all of those things can be defined as advanced settings in here. So it's very, very powerful. Just be aware that if you do something silly in here, you know, it'll burst into flames. So when you get done with that, you can go look at the bare metal Kickstart subtab, and it'll show you the URL to your Kickstart file. Now, we will automatically populate the Pixie environment with that, but if you're using another Pixie environment, that's the URL to this Kickstart file. And in fact, if you copy and paste it, there's your Kickstart file. Now, bear in mind, it's not a file. It's really just a representation that's generated by the database on the web server and posted to the, via that URL. So it's got all the information in it, you know, the partitioning and all that kind of good stuff. I can go in and tweak system details. So I go to the Kickstart, choose system details, and then I can go through things like set my SE Linux settings. It's enforcing, the correct answer here, enforcing. If you didn't get to see my SE Linux for Mere Mortals presentation yesterday, if you got any questions about SE Linux, go to the website, go to the Summit website and take a look at that presentation. I can do things like say, I want to enable the RHN satellite server to push config files. I have to explicitly enable that by checking this box. Ditto for running remote commands. If I want to be able to enter a command on the web UI and have it executed on my managed systems, I got to check that box before I kickstart the machine. I can set policies on if I need to re-kickstart a machine. Do I use the existing Kickstart profile? Do I delete it and create a new one, or do I just create a duplicate? Set the root password, and then update those settings. I can also, from system details locale, set the time zone and whether or not we use UTC. I can set up my partitioning by going system details partitioning. I can do logical volumes, I can do RAID, I can do regular partitions. This is very, very flexible. I can define what GPG and SSL keys I want to have available. You remember we created the GPG key. This is how we make sure that GPG key is installed at Kickstart time. Under the Software Package Groups tab, I can go through and I can say, I want to add these groups by using the @ symbol, at group 1, at group 2. I can choose individual RPMs by just listing the name of the RPM. I can even say exclude an RPM by doing minus and then the RPM name. Now, be aware, we will pull that RPM in if it is a dependency of something else you have asked for. That's one of the common questions I get. Hey, I told it I didn't want this, but it got pulled in anyway. And I'm like, well, that's an essential library to these other services that you did say you wanted to be installed. So they will be installed. Those dependencies will be installed. So you update the packages. Over here is kind of, in my opinion, where the magic of Kickstart really happens. I can choose my activation keys, and remember I said this is the Austin web server that's a development box. So I choose the Austin key, the development key, the web server key, and then also, remember I said I use that master key to activate all of my systems, so I check the box for the master key. So all of those activation keys will be used for this Kickstart. So I update the keys. I can then add scripts. Pre-installation, post-installation, and post-no-chroot scripts. So I click on scripts, choose add a Kickstart script. I can define the interpreter, you know, Perl or Python or Bash. If you don't put anything, it's Bash. And I'm going to put a couple of lines in there. We install OSAD when we register, but OSAD is not check configured on by default, so I say do that at installation time. So I did check config OSAD on, and just for giggles, I said echo the date into an etc ksdate file, so I know what date this system was kickstarted on. I can choose whether this is going to be a pre-installation script before we've even mounted the file system under /mount/sysimage and started installing RPMs to it. It's before we even partition the box. So I can do a pre-installation script. I can do a post-installation script, which means after we've installed all the RPMs and it does the chroot, where it changes the root from /mount/sysimage, which is what the first stage of the installer does, and then at the end it actually chroots so that the installer is using the file system root. So I can do pre, post, or post no chroot. I can even say this is going to be a template or a cobbler snippet, so I can use this across multiple Kickstarts. I choose Update the Kickstart. And then finally, on this final tab over here, it'll show me what the Kickstart file looks like with the ks.cfg, although it's not really a ks.cfg file. And you can scroll through and see all of the different pages and what all is in there, the GPG key and the SSL installations and the partitioning and all that stuff. You can even download the Kickstart file should you desire. So we've defined the Kickstart, and you notice that right now, I look at Systems, Overview, and I got nothing. I got no systems. It's a brand spanking new, fresh satellite server. So I go and I kickstart a machine, and this is what that looks like. I am presented with a menu, and I can choose which one of the kickstarts I've defined to kickstart this machine. Now, obviously, I've only done one. In the real world, you'd probably have several of them. So I define what it's going to be. I select it. It goes through and it pulls down the initial RAM disk and the kernel. It turns on the network interface. It creates the file systems. It checks dependencies for all the packages that I've selected, starts the installation, copies all of the RPMs across, and then when it gets done, or actually after this happens, this is what I wanted to point out earlier. Remember I said you can use multiple activation keys? In the back end, it actually runs RHN reg KS with the activation keys. There's that one that you don't know anything about because it's always going to generate an activation key for all the other stuff besides the things you've specified. And then there's the Austin key, the web key, the dev key, and the master key. So on the machine as it's kickstarting, it runs RHN reg KS -- activation key, all those activation keys. It runs all those post-installation scripts that we talked about. And when it gets done with all of those post-installation scripts, it will reboot the system. Hands-free. I love this. You can deploy a system in a few minutes. When the machine comes back up, it's registered and ready to manage. Little anecdote. I came to Red Hat almost 7 years ago from Bank of America. When I first started at Bank of America, we literally had build sheets. And I mean sheets of paper that you handed to a technician or to a sysadmin. They walked into the data center with a stack of CDs. And so, okay, I need to do this, and I need to do that, and I need to partition it like this. And it took forever. And how many of those things do you think were actually consistent? None, right? And how many times do you think we got the sysadmin that was the cowboy, right? Oh, I know better than what those doggone Linux architects, I'm going to make the swap file twice as big, and the home directory only needs to be this small. And so all of a sudden you got this nightmare, wild, wild west, crazy environment that's difficult to maintain. Then after you installed it, we would install tarballs. We would install tarballs on an RPM-based system. How can you manage tarballs? How do you know if the packages are consistent? How do you know if the installation is complete? How do you know what version you've got on there? It was a nightmare. So when I came on board, we brought the satellite server on board. It went from taking us 5 days, typically, to deploy a system or a group of systems with all the third-party software and registering it to the backup systems and all that stuff. It went from about 5 days down to about 18 minutes. And every single one of them was exactly the same. How much money do you think we saved on just not having the BS of trying to figure out what's going on when you log onto a machine? It was amazing. So as a Red Hat customer, I was blown away by this. When I came to work at Red Hat, I was like, oh, I get to work with the thing. It's awesome. Yeah, big old nerd, you know. So the system now, you remember this screen was empty before. It's registered to the satellite server, and when I click on it, there are my child channels, pre-populated. There are my entitlements, pre-populated. It's set up correctly there. When I go and I look under Software, Packages, List and Remove, and filter on HTTPD, it installed my web server packages for me. Didn't have to do that manually. When I go look at the groups, it's in the right groups. I didn't have to do anything. It did that at Kickstart time. When I go log onto the machine, I look and look, it deployed my config file out there, and it customized it for this specific machine. So very, very powerful. Push that stuff out at first boot. And my third-party software is installed. I'm logged on, and I run the hello command, and hello comes back. All right. On the machine, I run yum repo list, and sure enough, man, I've got my base channel, and I've got my hello world channel. So, I mean, I'm registered correctly. OSAD has been turned on, and my KS date file got created. So this system is ready for production at first boot. Does anybody think that's valuable? Instead of having to go back and hack all that crap? This is a really cool utility, a really cool tool. So, kind of an answer to your question, but wait a minute, Thomas, I don't want to have to go and have that cobbler menu. You know, I don't want my technicians out there, because they'll choose the wrong menu item every single time, right? No problem. You can use Cobbler to set by IP address. Be aware, Cobbler is included as an appliance component. In other words, we don't officially support going in and making changes to Cobbler. So if you do the stuff that I'm talking about here, the only guarantee that I make to you is if it breaks, you get to keep all the pieces. Having said that, I mean, this is what Cobbler does. It's not like we're going to hang up on you if you call in for support. But so what you can do is you can go in. I created a little shell script, cobbler-add.sh. And what I did was I figured out what the host name was, and I run the command, cobbler system add. The name is the host name. The Kickstart profile is that one that we defined. The IP address is whatever you pass from the command line. Give it a host name and say netboot enabled equals true. What happens when you do this is you run cobbler list. So I did cobbler system list. There was nothing. I look at the Pixie Linux config, and there's only a default Kickstart file, or the Pixie file. I run cobbler add with that IP address. It adds host 55. When I do cobbler system list, it's created an entry. And when I look in there, there is the Pixie boot file for that IP address. So you can use cobbler system add and do it so there's not even a menu. Yes, sir. Yeah, sure. Cobbler system add will work on MAC address, IP address. I think it'll even work on host name. So yeah, it's very, very flexible. So how do I set up my DHCP and Pixie and TFTP? Well, honestly, for the most part, the installer does it for you. It installs all those packages for you. The only thing that I've really found that you need to do is go in on your dhcp.conf and add in the next server and file name stanza. And when you do that, man, this becomes so easy to deploy. It becomes so easy to set all this stuff up. All right. Whew. Congratulations. We've just done what a consultant would take about a week to deploy in about 50 minutes. After all of the jumping around, it seems kind of discombobulated and disjointed, but do you see how that all kind of ties together and makes your Kickstarts really fly? I have found that this is one of the most powerful tools in Red Hat's portfolio for driving down cost. If you need training on this, go to redhat.com/training. If you want documentation, the documentation is fantastic. It's very, very complete. Yeah, if you go to docs.redhat.com or access.redhat.com, there is, I mean, reams of documentation about this. It's very well documented. On behalf of Red Hat, thank you very much for coming to Summit. We very much appreciate you being here. And personally, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. Any other questions, please come ask. Thank you.